When you think about the heroes of the American Revolution, who comes to mind? Probably famous generals, right? The guys on the statues? Well, some of the most incredible stories actually belong to people who've been almost completely forgotten. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of them, a woman who went from the sidelines of war to becoming a combat legend. So take a look at this. This is the Margaret C. Corbin Award. Even now, the U.S. Army gives this honor to military spouses for their amazing volunteer service. It's a huge deal, and it's named for a woman whose own story of courage is frankly unbelievable. So that's the big question, right? Who was Margaret Corbin? What on earth did she do almost 250 years ago that made her name one the U.S. Army still honors to this day? Well, let's get into it. Yeah, to really get why this award is such a big deal, you have to understand the woman herself. We've got to go all the way back to the very founding of the nation. Okay, so let's rewind. Margaret Cochran was born on the Pennsylvania frontier way back in 1751. In 1772, she married a farmer, a guy named John Corbin. Their life seemed pretty ordinary, but then the Revolutionary War kicked off. Her husband, John, enlisted. And Margaret? Well, she wasn't about to be left behind. Now, to really appreciate how wild her story is, we need to talk about what was actually expected of women during the war. Their roles were absolutely vital, for sure, but they were supposed to be kept far, far away from the front lines. So Margaret becomes what they called a camp follower. These were the wives and other women who literally followed the army around, and they were the army's essential backbone. They cooked the food, they washed the clothes, and they nursed the sick and wounded. I mean, they were absolutely crucial to keeping the whole Continental Army from falling apart. You've probably heard that name before, right? Molly Pitcher. It was kind of a general nickname for these camp followers. And part of the reason is because one of their jobs was to haul these heavy buckets of water to the cannons during a battle, to cool down the hot barrels so they could be fired again. Margaret Corbin was one of these so-called Molly Pitchers. But her story, her entire life, is about to change on one single fateful day in New York. This is the moment that Margaret Corbin, the camp follower, becomes a legend. Okay, picture this. The date is November 16th, 1776. The Continental Army is trying to defend Fort Washington, which is on the northern tip of Manhattan, and they are getting hammered by a massive attack from British and Hessian troops. Margaret's husband, John, is right there in the thick of it, manning a cannon. And in the middle of this brutal 4-hour battle, John Corbin is hit by enemy fire. He's killed instantly, right there at his post. Margaret, who was nearby helping him, sees the whole thing. She sees her husband fall. And this is the moment. She doesn't run. She doesn't scream. She doesn't even stop to grieve. Without a single moment of hesitation, she literally steps right over her husband's body, takes his place at the cannon, and keeps on fighting. And get this, she wasn't just, filling in. She was good at it. Like, incredibly good. She was cleaning, loading, and firing that cannon with so much skill and ferocity that historical records actually call her one of the deadliest gunners facing the enemy. But being that effective, well, it makes you a target. The enemy cannons turned their fire directly on her position. She was hit by 3 musket balls and a blast of grape shot that just tore into her chest, her jaw, and nearly ripped her left arm off. And with that, the last American cannon on that hill fell silent. Even though the fort was lost and Margaret was captured, her actions that day, they wrote her into the history books. Her life became this incredible series of unprecedented firsts for an American woman. Just stop and think about this list for a second. Margaret Corbin became the first woman to officially take a soldier's place in the Revolution, the first American woman we know of to be taken as a prisoner of war, the very first documented disabled female American veteran, and, maybe most remarkably, the first woman to ever receive a lifetime military pension from Congress. Now, her getting a pension at all was huge, a real historic moment. But, and this is a big but, it's also a reflection of the times. The amount she got was exactly half of what a male soldier in the same situation would have received. You'd think she would have been celebrated as a hero for the rest of her life, right? Well, not exactly. Her life after the war was tough. She never got the use of her arm back, and she lived in constant pain and poverty. Records from the time paint a picture of a hard-drinking veteran who was seen as disagreeable and was mostly shunned by a society that just didn't know what to do with a female war hero. So, for more than a century, the story of Captain Molly, as she was sometimes called, just kind of faded away. She was a local legend, sure, but her national importance was almost completely forgotten. That is, until a group of determined women decided they were going to find her. It's a pretty wild timeline. She dies in 1800 and is buried in a simple, unmarked grave. And that's it. For 126 years, she's lost to history. Then, in 1926, the Daughters of the American Revolution go on this mission. They painstakingly verify her old service records and manage to find her gravesite. Her remains were then dug up and reburied with full military honors at the prestigious West Point Cemetery. And today, if you ever find yourself in Fort Tryon Park in New York City, the site of the old Fort Washington, you'll find memorials to her. One of the plaques honors her gallant defense and calls her the first woman to take a soldier's place in the war for liberty. And that brings us right back to where we started. The U.S. Army honors her incredible legacy of courage and sacrifice with the award that carries her name, making sure the story of the woman who stepped up when her husband fell is never, ever forgotten again. Margaret Corbin's incredible journey from an unmarked, forgotten grave to a place of honor at West Point? It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? It leaves us with this final, lingering question. Whose stories have we yet to uncover?